Hey friends, I'm excited to be sitting down today with Dr. Roy Adams. Now, Roy has had an incredible life as a pastor and as a longtime associate editor of the Adventist Review. But today we're going to be focusing on his thoughts and his writings surrounding the sanctuary message, especially through the difficult years of Glacier View. Now, if you don't know what Glacier View is, you don't know what I'm talking about, head on over to your podcasting app, pull up the Adventist History Podcast, listen to the episodes on Desmond, Ford, and Glacier View, and you will be brought up to speed. Now, in this conversation, I learned a number of things, and especially how to pronounce a word that you're going to encounter very early on in this conversation. And you're going to get to hear from someone who was at Glacier View. And so that's pretty cool. And Dr. Adams is somebody who I learned doesn't really fit into either the pro-Desmond Ford camp nor in the Adventist tradition camp. Now, I've trimmed this interview a little bit just to help it flow better, but if you want the full episode, then you should subscribe to our secret podcast, Adventist History Extra. You can subscribe over at patreon.com. Let's get started. Let's go back to the beginning here. You were born on an island I had never heard of before, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce it, and I'm going to risk making a fool of myself on the internet. But it's pronounced, is it Keriku?
Keriku.
Keriku. Got it.
Keriku.
Keriku.
Mm-hmm.
All right. You were raised in an Anglican family before converting to Adventism, and that is a whole story in and of itself in your book. But you interned under a few pastors in the Caribbean before heading to Canada and then the United States?
Two in the Caribbean.
Yes, pastors. Two in the Caribbean, one in Canada.
No, in Canada there were another two pastors, but as it turned out, it was three occasions, because I was in Toronto on the one, moved to Montreal on the other, came back to Toronto in a third session. So okay. I regard that as really, really important in my ministry. It was like boot camp 5 times. That was very important for my ministry.
And it's something, in reading that, it was a hard thing to relate to, because I think I interned for 3 months total with one pastor.
Really?
Yes. And so that was a much more truncated part of my ministry.
And look how good you turned out, perhaps.
Well,
necessary, then.
I don't know that everyone would say that, but we're okay right now. We're okay. But early in your ministry, you note that you heard what you called rumblings about the sanctuary, that there was maybe some controversy or discontent about it in some way, shape, or form. Can you explain, what did you hear pastoring throughout the 1960s and 70s about the sanctuary?
Actually, these rumblings were almost inarticulate, you might say. It was the kind of thing that came at the end of a conversation where somebody brought up the sanctuary and another person would say, "Oh, you know that such and so has left the church because of the sanctuary. You know that such and so thinks that 1844 is nonsense. You heard that." It was something that was dropped, never gotten into in detail. But remember, at that time, I'm a young Adventist, actually, and as I answer your question, I'm thinking of Caribbean Union College, as it used to be called, and the debates we had there back and forth, and that's where it began. So I'm hearing this and wondering, as a young Adventist, albeit now studying it for the ministry, what is this about? What kind of skeleton do we have here? So it comes to the back of your head. I didn't think about it much, but later it was to blossom into something.
Yes. And moving forward a few more years, you decided to write your dissertation on the sanctuary doctrine. So did you pick that subject in part to kind of say, all right, I've heard these rumblings about the sanctuary for a number of years. I want to figure out what's going on, or was there another catalyst for you picking that topic?
I think that played a large role in it. My interest in this doctrine, in this teaching. I think it played a role in a very complicated sense. I knew I wanted to delve more into this, But another side of me said, I don't think you should. This is such a sublime topic. This is such a sacred space. How can you desecrate it with a dissertation, this sort of thing?
Mm.
But eventually, I decided to go in that route, and the tack I was taking was how non-Adventists have perceived our doctrine of the sanctuary. That's what I wanted to write
Yeah.
a dissertation on. But as I did research on this, I thought, if you're going to write about the doctrine of the sanctuary in the Adventist Church, you had better first understand the history of this teaching in the church. Where have we been? Where did we come from to get where we are today? That should be the
Mm.
beginning point. And so this is what I did, comparing three stalwarts in the church, using them as the source for my understanding of what the church was all about in regard to this teaching.
Yeah. And for those who may not have read your dissertation, there's probably only a couple out there, but would you tell them who are the three people that you analyzed in your dissertation?
Yeah, it was Uriah Smith, larger than life editor of the church, and he was many other things. And there was Albion Fox Ballinger, and incidentally, I was attracted to him because of his second name, Fox. As I was researching one day, I said, "Who is this guy who has a name like this, a second name?" And discovered that he was a very important figure in regard to sanctuary studies. And then the last one was Million Lawrence Andreasen.
Mm-hmm.
He was a third one.
Yeah. We've talked about him in the podcast. Sadly, I haven't talked so much about Ballinger. That was a bit of an oversight, but we'll rectify that as I go back and redo season 1's episodes. So you wrote about these three. Of course, what are the years you're working on this doctorate? You're writing this dissertation.
So this is the late 70s. The dissertation was finished. I was finished the morning I left for Glacier View, early that morning. So that was in the late 70s and the beginning of the 80s.
Very good. Yeah, a momentous time to be writing on the subject of the sanctuary.
Absolutely.
You wrote that you were, of course, in the middle of the dissertation when Desmond Ford gave his Adventist Forum presentation.
Yes.
And I was wondering, I don't know if you can remember this, but I was wondering, how did you get a copy of that tape? I know they went all over the place.
They did go all over the place, and I think that's how I got it. I can't remember now who gave me a copy, who I purchased a copy from. I think it was Gabe. I'm not sure I purchased it. I may have purchased it. And so I gave it the first listen through that means. So I don't know now how it actually came in my hand, but it was very shortly after the event took place.
Yes. Well, I think that's how the Adventist grapevine works, right?
Yeah.
We can deliver faster than Amazon.
Yeah.
So you listened to the tape, and you also got a transcript of it.
Exactly. I went down to the Ellen G. White Estate there on the campus of Andrews University, and asked Mrs. Jemison, Hedwig Jemison, who was in charge of me, to give me a transcript of it. And she dutifully did that. And I read it. I read the document.
All right. So you had two different reactions here that you write about. You had a reaction when you listened to the tape, and you had a different reaction when you read the transcript. Can you tell us why do you have two different reactions to Ford's presentation?
Yeah, when I listened to the tape, his presentation was so powerful, so forceful by voice that I thought, my dear, the doctrine of the sanctuary is finished. And remember, if you're writing a dissertation is not a term paper. This is serious business. You're making a contribution to international scholarship, so to speak. And it must be an authentic document. And if the subject of your discourse has been exploded, then you really are in trouble. So I now read the document, and I think my reaction that you might read in my memoir was a little too strong in retrospect. I discussed in fact, I said it was froth or something like that.
Yes.
No, I wouldn't say that now. Um, but that's how it appeared to me as I read it.
Yeah.
And the lesson I learned from that is to, when you hear something that just blows you away and so on, get a transcript of that thing. And in the
Mm.
quietness of your study, your home, wherever, just ask yourself, is it making the same impression?
Mm.
Now, what he said there in retrospect, how many years now? More than 40 years
Yeah.
ago, I have um, a different view on today. And I don't know if this is going to come into our discussion, but my conception, my regard for Des is a little more nuanced than it used
Mm.
to be.
Well, that's something we can explore if you're willing to explore it. What do you mean by nuanced? You've come to maybe appreciate him a little bit more or a little bit less over the years?
A little bit more. I
Okay.
couldn't be where I am today without Des Ford. It's perhaps heresy to say. I remember when I arrived in Canada from the Philippines. Um, there was one of my jobs was as, what was it now, human relations director, apart
Mm-hmm.
from being associate secretary and also editor of the paper. I was human relations director, and there was a very feisty gentleman there in Canada who gave a lot of grief to the leaders. He was a black gentleman, and he was not taking any prisoners.
Mm.
And because of his forcefulness, because of his brashness, shall I say, it made it more. It made it easier for those of us like myself, with a more moderate, a more gentle tone, to
Mm-hmm.
get through to the powers that be. That work that guy did was a great help to me in my work, because when I came along, he had already burnt so much down that everybody was really willing to listen to a calm voice. So I think of Des Ford as like that. The things that he discussed were avant-garde in his time. In its time, it was breaking grounds that had never been broken before. And so when I came along, this little nobody, they did not see that I was saying some of the same things, but I got permission to say it because of Des Ford.
Mm.
Now, some of the things that he said, some of the things that some of these other folks who came before agonized and obsessed over. I don't want to be disrespectful, but to me, that's, how should I say it? They don't, they don't phase me.
Mm.
If a person is talking, for example, I hear discussion of the investigative judgment, say, well, long ago, more than 40 years, perhaps, maybe less, when I wrote my book on the sanctuary, I discussed that. In fact, in my dissertation, I already mentioned that, how that word came into the Adventist vocabulary. If you know how that word came into the Adventist vocabulary, then you don't shed blood over it.
Yeah.
You find a way of expressing it, and Des did, as he talked about the pre-Advent judgment. In
Mm.
that discourse at PUC, there was a point where
Yes.
he said, let me just tell you where I'm standing. And one of the
Yeah.
things he said there was, I believe in a pre Advent judgment. That expression is a non emotive expression. It's a
Mm-hmm.
mild expression, but it carries the same thing that it seems to me that the pioneers in wanted to convey, even though they did not understand the full grasp of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So somehow, during this time, when everyone is trying to figure out what to do with Des in the aftermath of his forum talk, I think as you're saying is he created space for this conversation.
I like that expression. Yes, he created space for this
He
conversation.
created space for this conversation, and that's not a bad thing, because it allowed folks like yourself to write on this with a degree of openness and candor that you otherwise might not have been able to do. Is that a
That's
good way of
That's
characterizing
putting
it?
it correctly. Yes.
Okay. You were at Andrews at the time while Des was writing his manuscript in advance of what would be known as the Sanctuary Review Committee that would meet at Glacier View. How did you get an invitation? And the reason why I'm asking this is, don't take offense at this. Like, how did you get an invitation? Not with that tone, but there's a lot of folks who wanted an invitation to Glacier View, and
Yes.
who would write Neil Wilson's office. I have a number of these letters, kind of hoping to be on that list, because I think there was a sense that people knew this was going to be a major event, a landmark event of some sort. Whatever happened there, this was a big deal.
Right.
So, again, with no tone implied, how did you get invited there?
No, you don't have a tone implied, but I would put that tone in because, no, I was writing this dissertation on the sanctuary, and my major professors were all headed for Glacier View. It was Raoul Dedirin, it was Bill Johnson, and it was Fritz Guy. And they were all impressed at what I was doing and felt this should have some hearing at Glacier View. And so they contacted the powers that be, either together or separately, I do not know. And they said, Roy, we have made arrangements for you to attend Glacier View and give a summary of your dissertation work. Me? Yes. And so it was that I got to be at Glacier View. And this is why I don't remember as much about Glacier View as others might, because my agenda was different. And I was really nervous because, as I said, the dissertation is not a term paper. If what Des Ford had said, or if what the committee or the conference concluded militated against basic points I had made in the dissertation, I was in trouble.
Yeah.
This was not the digital time where you can just go and change stuff in the middle of a document. If you found a mistake in the middle, everything had to be redone.
Yes.
Yes.
I was surprised that you turned in your dissertation the day that you left for Glacier View. Was there not a part of you that was thinking, maybe I should hold off another week and see what happens here before I submit this?
It wasn't turned in that day. It
Ah,
was finished that morning. The person typing it for me finished it that morning, but I think 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I picked it up, but did not turn it in that day. And so here you have a complete dissertation that is in danger of being wrecked by the meeting you're planning to attend.
yeah.
Yeah, I took it with me to Glacier View, the copy.
Ah. I mean, I asked, do you remember if you showed it to anybody? Did you ever hand a
No.
copy to Des? Or
Once the dissertation is written, you don't show it to anybody but your professors. They're the first ones to see it. So what I was presenting was a summary of it.
I see.
It was held on the lock and key, that document.
Understood. You were in group 3,
Yeah.
I believe, there, in terms of the study groups that met in the morning and then presented their findings in the early afternoon. It was chaired by Duncan Eva from the General Conference. You had Jack Castle as president of PUC. You had Fred Veltman there as a chair of the religion department at PUC. You had Gerhard Hasel. You had some big fish.
Heavyweights, yes.
Yeah, some heavyweights in that group. I know you said you don't remember as much about being at Glacier View as perhaps some others do, but I wanted to ask if there was any memories that emerged from the discussions in that study group.
Not really. I do remember that they gave me permission to speak. I mean, I was surprised at that, and to have something to say in a group like that is extraordinary. I do remember how seriously everybody took things. Duncan Eva was a very serious person, and maybe a little too serious, but I mean, you didn't fool with him. And so everybody in the committee was struggling toward one goal. It was a camaraderie that was very impressive to me as a student. But I don't remember. I don't remember particular things said by these heavyweights that morning, and to their regret, I suppose, if they heard that. But there is something that I remember from Glacier View that I found. I wonder if I have it here. I found. Oops, I didn't bring it with me. It's upstairs and I'm far away from it. But there was something that I found that I wrote, just notes taking, and that was Elder Pearson. He was retired at the time, and he came to the meetings, and he gave a very very serious presentation, and he ended by saying that not he. I don't know if he ended it this way, but in the course of his remarks, he mentioned that he was distressed that so many of the teachings of the church are coming under question now. He said that as he read Des Ford's manuscript, red lights were flashing all over. He said, and he said, and this is the sentence I remember, that if you cannot be at home, putting it in my own words, with every doctrine of the church, then you should consider it unethical to have any relationship to the Adventist treasury. So you're putting it in those words. And I thought that this was precisely the attitude in which it was difficult for theology to function, for progress to be made in the Adventist church. It was not the attitude taken by Neil Wilson, who was then the current president. Neil's was much more conciliatory than Pearson was. With Pearson, you got the impression, boy, you had better shut up or else. At the same time, Wilson in his Friday presentation was asking folks to be generous to one another, to listen to one another.
Yes. You're talking about the letter that Pearson had written that was read there.
It was. He didn't appear in person then. You jogging my memory. It was a letter he sent.
It was a letter he sent.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and Nielsen didn't read it. He had somebody read it, but I'm sure it was addressed to Wilson. That was one of those things one of those turning points that I've in my reading about Glacier View that some folks, of course, if you're pro Des, you cite this as a example of trying to tip the scales. Should the voice of somebody who's not there, who didn't have the benefit of hearing the study group's report and have conversations with those who are there, should they be able to be heard in that meeting? Right. But also, he's a former General Conference president. Are you going to deny him the right to be heard at the privilege of being heard, I should say, at the meeting? Yeah. That's one of those controversial moments. But you remember the letter quite well. That is indeed what he said, pretty close to being exactly what he said. Mm-hmm. And he said it a number of times in different ways. So you're at Glacier View. The atmosphere there is. I have a number of different reports where there are times when it's very tense. There's times when there's a little bit of camaraderie among the scholars who are friends, the administrators who are friends. And there's some jokes that I've heard on the recording as well. Is that right? Like church jokes, not stand-up comedy here going on. Right. But of course, you're not probably going on long walks with Gerhard Hazel and Neil Wilson. So what was your experience about the tone or the mood of that week?
Well, this was a lot of work if you see the schedule. And if you were faithful attending meetings, you didn't have a lot of spare time. One of the things that I remember during that time was meeting Ford personally. It was the first time I was meeting him. personally because of the positions that he had taken. I suppose not too many of the attendees were fraternizing, so to speak, with him. Hence the hence the fact that either he came to my table or went to his table, but in any case he was alone, and
Hmm.
so I had a chance to speak to him personally
Hmm.
that morning, and I did try to reason with him along the lines that Heppenstall was taking. I think Heppenstall did that later. But I don't know that if you've ever you said you interviewed Des?
I did not. I didn't.
I
I
see.
didn't start thinking about Glacier View until after he had passed.
Okay. He is he's a superb debater, and the likes of me, a seminary student, was not going to get very far with him. So it was just a polite response to me as I tried to bring, who am I, an
Yeah.
appeal to him. Um, it was particularly over this, what he called the apotalismatic principle that he was enunciating, and trying to show him how that would give room, taking his position as for it, how that would give room for some of the other things that the church was teaching. Why
Mm.
did he not, therefore, just open up? If you are going to say, if you're going to propose this apotalismatic principle, then of course, why
Yeah.
not just be open to these other things?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So it's great. You had a chat with him. You had a chance to meet him there, and you know, here's a is purely an opinion question. But since you're retired, I think you probably are safe to answer it if you're willing. Do you think Glacier View made the right call? Was there anything there that you might change? Now, keep in mind, while you may be retired, apparently the general conference can still come get you in your dreams. So still may want to be careful.
Ah, it's. Let me put it this way. I think that I agreed with the consensus of Glacier View that it
Hmm.
reached there, uh, and I've moved on from that consensus even, and I just think, if you would pardon me, that we are just too uptight about this doctrine of the sanctuary. And I say this because of my confidence in its integrity, in its biblical integrity. So that the things that phase so many of my brothers and sisters still, they
Hmm.
don't phase me.
Mm.
You take, for example, the apparent discrepancy between Leviticus 16 and Daniel 8:14. I have been preaching into the air and the wilderness really on this and saying, look, these are not antagonistic. Daniel 8:14 does not deal with the cleansing of the sanctuary from the sins of God's people. That is clear from the text. But you cannot avoid grappling with what happened in Leviticus. This also is biblical. And my position has been that they meet eschatologically in the end. We're
Mm.
dealing with different things, but they both, and somehow that does not get through. I'm surprised that you know that my books exist, but I've been saying these things for a while, and perhaps I'm getting away with it because no one is seeing them. But I don't think that Glacier View um, was harsh to Ford. It could be that his division might have been harsh to him. If I'm to change anything, is perhaps the way that he was handled by the division. I think that there could have been a more redeeming way to handle the situation with him personally.
Mm.
This is where I would go with that.
Yeah.
But there are folks in the Adventist church, and this is what I'm noticing in retirement, who are so hung up on some of these sanctuary details that sometimes I'm I'm pleased. In this last book I wrote, You might remember that I wrote it because one gentleman at the end of one of my sermons said that nobody's talking about this anymore.
Mm.
And I wrote it to show that somebody's talking about it. But there are times I'm glad that few people are talking about it because of the nonsense we say when we talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about, for those who are watching or listening, talking about his latest book, Revisiting the Sanctuary, which we will talk about a little bit later on as well. Yeah, I see what you're saying here, and that there's I think what you're getting at here, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that there's a difference between defending a biblical position on the sanctuary versus defending an Adventist tradition on the sanctuary,
Absolutely, yes. You put it right.
and we should be open to growing and learning and discussing how we understand the sanctuary in the Bible biblically. And I don't want to say the word evolving, but it is we evolve over time in our doctrines, and we should be open to how we just because we study the Bible, there's more scholars, there's more kind of maybe biblical literacy in the church than there has been in the past, and so we should embrace that and maybe re-articulate our doctrines and our rather than just merely defending tradition, because this is what Uriah Smith wrote. This is what we have to believe. Right? You're not saying, well, we got to defend Adventist tradition at all costs, but you are saying we should understand the biblical teaching of the sanctuary at all costs. Like, that's the important thing. And you didn't go down the direction Des did, obviously. But you did write about the sanctuary again, years after Glacier View. 1993, you wrote about the sanctuary.
Right.
And it's called The Sanctuary, Understanding the Heart of Adventist Theology. A reviewer warned that your book would cause a terrible firestorm. Can you tell us why? Are you a secret heretic?
I think, and remember, they never tell you who said these things, which is good. But there was sufficient said by the reviewer to let me know what they were thinking. There was somebody, and it's difficult for me to say if it's the same person, but I suspect it might have been, who wanted me to preserve more movements of Christ and the Father in the heavenly sanctuary. There are some who wanted furniture there that because they read about it, about these furniture things in the book of Revelation and other paraphernalia. But in particular, my view of my conception of the heavenly sanctuary, where I was taking the view that we should not impose the type on the antitype in the sense of having a holy place and a most holy place. I was making the point that the sanctuary in heaven is one. And when Jesus ascended, he went into the presence of God, which is tantamount to going into the most holy place in the earthly sanctuary. And it's something I saw first in Ballinger, and I mentioned that. So this heretic who was ostracized from the church, here I am in that book, indicating that I had seen light in what he had said, because he was correct. And I think that's what instigated the person to say that Roy Adams might be looking for his own Glacier View, this time with him as the center of attention.
So I guess you're characterizing this as this reviewer was more interested in defending the tradition, like Ballinger is bad, like we have a good guys and bad guys look at our history. It's not, and you're saying, no, evaluate his argument. Is it biblical or not? That's the thing that matters.
Right. And, and anticipating there might be folks who are hung up on Ballinger. I wrote on Ballinger, as I said, in the dissertation, so I knew a little of what he taught. And in the dissertation, or was it in this book, I mentioned that had the church gone down hook, line, and sinker what Ballinger was teaching, we would have been the laughing stock of the theological world. So it is not as though I was in love with Ballinger, but I saw that what he said on these points were correct, and they could help us navigate some of the pitfalls that are in our way as we try to proclaim this particular teaching to a new generation.
Yes. Yes. And of course, you couldn't be done with that book. You had to write on the sanctuary again, relatively recently, 2023, I believe it was, with your book Revisiting the Sanctuary. And in this book, you're responding to Cottrell's unpublished manuscript.
Yes.
That was well known, I think, even in the 80s. Of course, Des was very aware of it and things like that. But I guess I'm curious, why choose to respond to his manuscript in 2023?
Yes.
A manuscript, I would guess, maybe a tiny handful of your readers are even aware of, let alone have read.
Right. Yes. This is curious, isn't it? And it helps me to make this point that every time I write on the sanctuary, I wish that somebody else would have done it. Colleagues of mine who are much more learned, much more expert in these things. In regard to that manuscript from Cottrell, I was sent it by a friend on the West Coast who told me it's making waves where he was, and asked me to. He knew that I'd written on the sanctuary, so can he respond to that? I then took that manuscript and sent it to two of my colleagues, Old Testament scholars, and I said to them, "Here is this situation I'm handling. Can you give any light? Can you just give an assessment, a brief assessment that I can respond to this person?" Because I didn't feel that I had the competence to do it. And both of them indicated they were too busy to look at it. So I began mulling over this, and I said, I wrote a preliminary response to this gentleman and told him what I felt about it. But why don't you, in as much as other people might have questions, why don't you just tackle this? Because it is concise. It is not something like a 900-page document like Des Ford wrote for the Glacier View.
Yeah.
And so, nevertheless, in its conciseness, it does touch on just about everything that Des Ford handled. So why not tackle this? You don't have to mention Des Ford, but you're shooting. I don't like killing two birds with the same stone, but that's the expression I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
That as you answer him, it's also dealing with some of the questions people have in regard to the issues that Des Ford raised. And so this is what I did. And I limited myself just to that document, not to other things that Cottrell wrote, just to this, the 4 pages, the 4 corners of this document. That's what I'm dealing with. And I wanted, having gotten through that, answering him, there are some other things on the sanctuary that I wanted to say, not controversial things, just things that deal with my own convictions, that deals with the broadening of the doctrine. For example, the judgment, the same judgment that we talked about before. I wanted to deal with that, and I was very tickled that the press allowed me to say what I wanted to say on the judgment, because it is not something where God is going over books to see if a few folks in New England or wherever Adventists exist are right for heaven or not. This is a huge matter that if we as Adventists proclaimed it properly, we would have something to say about the powers that be right now, including the powers that be in our country. This is judgment time. There is somebody watching who is even above the Supreme Court of the United States. So to me, it's a huge matter, this judgment, the pre-Advent judgment that Des Ford and myself believe in.
Yeah.
It's a huge thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So at this rate, though, your next book on the sanctuary should be about 2035, 2040, somewhere in that range. Or do you think you're done writing on the sanctuary at this point?
Well, as it turns out, I'm writing on the sanctuary right now.
Okay.
And the reason is quite simply that as the last manuscript got to the press, it was too long-winded. And so I could not publish everything. And there are some, I mean, to decide what to leave out was like deciding which of my fingers should be amputated. Um, so that was very difficult. And I thought perhaps some of this should see the light of day, but I don't have a publisher at the moment. I usually write things out before I get a publisher because I write it up for my own benefit to get things out of my system, whether it would be published or not. So I'm writing. I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day. Meanwhile, there are some fresh things that have come to me, and I will include that there. Keep it a short, just kind of a booklet, I would
Mm-hmm.
think, footnotes, so to speak, of this
Okay.
nature.
All right. Last question for you. Appreciate your time. And the last question is, what do you wish Adventists today? And I'm thinking specifically of younger Adventists who perhaps didn't grow up hearing about Glacier View and Desford and the turmoil of the 70s over the sanctuary. What do you want younger Adventists to know about the sanctuary? Why is it important?
You know, this question leads me to quips I hear so often denigrating the sanctuary. It leads me back to some of those innuendos before when I was a young pastor and so on. And I think if I should speak to our young people today, I would say, understand that when you come to Daniel 8:14, understand when you come to Daniel 9, at the center of that, as difficult it is, and you don't have to understand everything about it. I mean, you had to give me counsel about these cameras on this thing. You understand those things. There are others who understand how the engine in my car works. I can drive the car. I don't understand all there is to know about the engine. So you can accept the doctrine of the sanctuary without understanding everything about it, on the confidence that those among us who are competent, and I have to do that, who are competent, who have looked into this thing, have found that the center of all this complication is Jesus Christ, and God chose Daniel, a man of exceedingly high intellect and learning and training, to give this message to the world. And And at the center of that message is the message that Messiah is on his way. He will come. There is a solution to the human problem. That's what the message of the sanctuary is all about. So I would say to our young people, at the center of this teaching is Jesus Christ and our complete abandonment to him, our complete dependence on him. That's why I'm so excited about this doctrine. And this is why I want to end that little book I'm writing. It's all about Jesus.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful and well said. My friends, we've been talking about the sanctuary message with Dr. Roy Adams, but there's a lot more to his life, as we alluded to in the very beginning of this conversation. If you want to pick up his book, Beams of Heaven Guiding Me, it is on Amazon, and I trust you'll be able to find it there. And take advantage of that Amazon convenience. Of course, you can get his most recent book, Revisiting Sanctuary. It is on Kindle, so it is convenient. And Dr. Adams, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. It was so nice to have met you. God bless.